Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Debrief with your friends here at Sandals Church. My name is Stephanie Schaefer, here with the PMB and two of our lovely guests. We've got Pastor Alfredo Ramos and Pastor Adam Atchison.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have been helping Pastor Matt prep the series that we just started right now. Can you guys talk some about Invited and what it is we're doing for the next few weeks here at Sandals Church as we get ready for Christmas?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Invited is the idea of letting our church and our people know who we are and what we do. And so we want to be upfront in a church that's all about being real. We don't want to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. We want to let you know what you're getting into, in a sense, what we expect of people who call Sandals Church home, the exciting things that God is doing. And so we started off this week, obviously, with how we look to leaders and the qualifications biblically for leaders, and what you can entrust yourself to with leadership in the church at Sandals, based on 1 Timothy 3. So.
Yeah. Now, I would just add kind of to your intro from this last sermon that it's not so much that we've invited God into our lives, but he's really inviting us into his story. And that's kind of the nature of Jesus's life and ministry, inviting people to know him and follow him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And so when we were talking about how to open, there was a couple reasons that I picked the passage to open that we did, but really when we got down to verses, I think it was 13 through 15, or it was 11 through 13, I can't remember, in 1 Timothy 3, he says, so that you may teach people how to act in the household of God. Mm-hmm. And so we just want to just be reminded that we're being invited to God's house. And so I think the churches become very unhealthy and dysfunctional when we think about them in terms of, this is my church. And it's like, well, wait a minute, this is his church. This is his house. This is his rules. And I think all of us can get confused. We can get kind of self-centered, narcissistic, rather than Christ-centric on what the purpose and the role of the church is. And we just need to be reminded that the leader's purpose is to remind us of our purpose. So we got to make sure that we get the right leader. Otherwise, the church is going to do whatever the church wants. Mm. And that's not always the best thing, especially in a culture today that demands, God do things our way rather than the biblical God who demands that we do things his way. So he's inviting us into that. And I thought our church responded really, really well this weekend. And I thought it was a great opening. My voice is really tired this morning, so I'm going to let you guys do some more of the talking. I haven't had a sore vocal cords in a while, so My wife said that I'm becoming very John Bevere-ish. So Lisa Bevere's husband. So he's kind of a yeller. So John, if you're ever listening, I apologize for that. I've never actually met John face to face, but love you, love your book, love your wife. She's awesome. So,
okay. Well, and people sent in a lot of really great questions from this week's sermon, which I was really excited about.
Yeah, confusing messages help stimulate great questions.
We do have one quick follow-up from last week, though, from Spencer, who says that on last week's episode about worship, Pastor Matt mentioned that if you want to serve God, you'll be sacrificing every weekend. I agree with this, but what are your thoughts on having breaks in serving church in order to serve your family? I want to give God my everything through serving in the church, but I know that leaving family in the dust to do that, especially during seasons when I'm needed a lot at home, doesn't make sense. What does the Bible say about the balance of serving in ministry and serving at home?
Well, the Bible doesn't say a whole lot about balance. What it says is 6 days you shall work, 1 day you rest, and devote that to God. And so I would even say this. So I hear people say this, and I'm sure you guys hear this all the time. Like, how many hours are you asking to serve? I mean, I don't think it's a lot. And so I think if you're so busy that you just can't find time to greet, you can't find time to get in a group, you can't find time to give God an hour or two on a day that's fully devoted to him, I think that's a problem. And I think in our culture, what I really would encourage you to do is let's look at every other area of your life first. So let's take a magnifying glass to the 6 days that you're working, and let's look at that before we talk about, well, I need to take a break from God. And so what we can't do is, Lord, I've been disobedient in 6 days, so now I need to be disobedient to you in the 1 day. And I think, don't you guys agree at Sandals? I think we care about the lives of our people, and we don't want to overburden them. And so some of the things that we're asking people to do. And I just think we live in a culture. I mean, you're a coach right now for your son's soccer team, so you know how frustrating it is to get parents to participate. And our culture is not a participatory culture. We're not a service-oriented culture anymore, and that's something that's changed. And I think it's changed as we've moved further and further away from a Judeo-Christian ethic. We just our time is our time. And we need to make sure that we're saying, okay, hey, I'm a part of my church, and so I'm attending, I'm serving, and I'm giving. And so what I would say is obviously there are seasons, like you and your wife just recently had a little kid. You guys have 4 kids, and you have I don't know if I can say this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a kid on the way. So
Too late now.
yeah, I was like, whoa, we're going to edit that out of the show. There are seasons. I mean, I'm not expecting Stephanie to serve. You do check-in, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be like, hey, Stephanie, you had that baby 6 days ago. Let's get back to check-in. That's a realistic thing. But I see people all the time take a year off. Oh, I'm taking a year. I'm like, what is going on? So I would just say, let's invite. So this weekend we said invite other people into your life. Let's invite some other people who care about God and aren't going to tell you what you want to hear, but we need to hear. And let's look at your life. What are you doing? And I'm constantly convicted of things I need to eliminate in my life, especially in terms of television. You and I were talking about the Mandarin. Like I'm like, so you got
Mandalorian.
Mandalorian. You got me all fired up about that show. The new Disney streaming channel. And Fredo's like gonna distract me from my quiet time and from the Lord. And I was just like, I don't know. But
You're doing that to him.
yeah, you were doing that to me. So it's not me. But I want to watch that. But okay, so what am I going to eliminate?
Yeah.
And so I think most of us, and we're all pastors here. Stephanie, you're in ministry. The first thing people eliminate is God, and they expect God to understand that. So,
Yeah, I would say from a practical standpoint, most of the teams that we ask people to serve on last a service.
Yeah.
And so we're asking for, when it comes to joining a team and being a part of serving the church, it's really about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
The one exception is our worship and production teams. I came from East Valley, and for a time we had 5 services every weekend. We have 5 services at Hunter Park, and so that commitment's a whole lot more. That spans 2 days. I mean, you're talking on average about 12 hours.
Yeah.
And so that's a different kind of deal. With our production team, for instance, we were wanting to build those teams to where it was a rotation of about every 3rd week, because they're putting in a whole lot more than a lot of the other teams. And so I actually think I might know who Spencer is, and he does serve on our worship team at East Valley, and he's got some young kids. And so I do think that he's on the other end of the spectrum, not the cultural problem where nobody's doing anything or they check out for a year or whatever. Some of us are more apt to overserve, and there is an extreme there. If you're familiar with our Enneagram series, if you're a high 2, you're going to say yes to a lot. And so the discipline of bringing some balance in is knowing that for every yes, I need to find out where the no's are as well. So
yeah. And we would never ask our church members to serve in a way that would lead to unhealth.
Yeah, exactly.
At home. Like the assumption is that you're able to pour out something that you already possess. And then secondly, I feel like the invitation to serve is really an opportunity for you to grow in Christ likeness, and for you to meet people at church, for you to practice what we're trying to practice together as a church. And you touched on this a second ago. We're not a really heavy programmatic church.
No.
Like, we don't have something every day of the week,
Which is intentional.
Yeah, which is intentional, so that you can gather once a week with your church family, and then be in groups, and then also offer yourselves for about an hour or so during the weekend. And so, yeah, I love what you said in terms of let's examine the rest of the week and consider what are some other things that can be adjusted, or allow other people to speak into it and see, man, I could really let go of these 5 hours of just kind of uselessness, or I'm just squandering it in entertainment or whatever it is.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I think even organizationally, there are certain rhythms where, for instance, during the summer, we kind of slow some things down a little bit. We're aware that families are, with kids are out of school and there's vacations and things like that. So we're not redlining 365 days. Like, we're going to create this unhealthy environment where we're demanding and things like that. And so, at Sandals Church, I mean, coming back to even as a segue maybe to pastoral leadership, we are very much, interested in our first ministry being our family. And I don't think that, I mean, a lot of people say that, but time and time again, I've seen examples at Sandals Church where if something is out of balance, or there's a season where somebody needs to back off for the sake of their marriage or their family, or something's going on at home, there's a lot of grace and a lot of freedom to do that. So that principle that a lot of people know and even maybe speak, I think we really do a really good job of living that out and creating that kind of space, while at the same time asking for a lot. I mean, it's a list of 15 qualifications, and so it is a high calling, and there are high expectations, but nothing that I think leads to an environment where unhealth is going to happen.
Yeah. So Spencer, thank you, for serving. I don't know who Spencer is. Most people are not doing what you're doing, and there are ministries that take up enormous amounts of time, and there are seasons. There are seasons where you can do that and you can't do that. And we've even had this like with, I think of specifically, your friends, the Bogenwrights. Andrew's wife was one of our campus worship leaders, and she just came and said, look, this is a season where I need to be, devoted to my boys, and I can't do this, even though she feels called, because she has her boys for a season. And she said, I'm still going to serve, but I'm going to reduce. And so I think a lot of times people fall into this, well, either can or I can't. Come in and talk to us and just say, hey, I need a reduced role for a period of time. I want to continue my connection, because here's my concern. So you stop serving, you stop connecting, and then before you know it, you're not in church. And that's kind of the movement. Sure. And so maintain context, because a lot of people get hurt when maybe they stop showing up and they stop serving. They say, well, I haven't heard from anybody. Listen, let me just help you out. This took me a lot of time to realize everybody's treading water. Everybody's treading water. And so if we don't naturally bump into each other, like the three of us meet on Mondays when we can, and we get paid to do this, and even that's a struggle to all get there and make it happen. And the truth is, if we stop for whatever reason talking about sermon series together, that's going to impact our relationships and our connectedness. Sure. Our relationship has changed since you got married and started to have all these thousands of children. Okay, so there are seasons, right? I mean, you and I do not see each other and connect with each other the way that we did at one time. And so the thing is how do I maintain connection with the church? Because again, I hear this all the time. I don't know anybody. I have to sit alone. Well, are you in group? Are you on a team? And it's usually no. And then it's God's fault or the church's fault. And I'm like, okay, suspense, love you, pray through that. Yeah. That was a lot of advice for one question.
Yeah, and if I think the biggest question is, if you're going to take a break, are you using that break to actually invest in what needs, why you need the break in the first place? Yeah. And so I think a lot of times I need a break, to your point, and that extra hour and a half, or, if it's worship or production, 10, 12 hours on the weekend, it's not quite as much for a lot of our campuses that only have 2 services. But man, are you actually going to spend time with your wife and your kids when you take a break? Or are you just going to check out and get lazy and have me time?
Which is actually hard to do if you're in an unhealthy marriage or relationship. Like, man, you want to not know what to do with yourself. Go spend a whole day with a spouse you haven't been connecting with. You're just going to be like staring at each other, because what you need to say is, hey, let's have a good 5-minute conversation. Let's put our phones down for 5 minutes and let's talk. And let's work our way up to 10 minutes. And then let's, some of Tammy and I's biggest fights have been on vacation, because we haven't been spending time together. We haven't been connecting. And now we're staring at each other for 7 days on a beach. And you're like, okay, this is not working.
There's a lot of accumulation.
Yeah, there's a lot of accumulation there. And what we really need to do is, instead of saying, oh, we need a vacation, we really need a date night where we're gonna talk for an hour. Yeah. And movies is not date night unless you go and talk about the movie afterwards. Right. So I think movies are okay if but you got to connect. And so I would say look for small moments to connect. And again, just like you guys have parents, I want to spend my whole day with my kid at Disneyland. Well, you're gonna want to beat your kid at some point.
Oh yeah.
Maybe. Preach. Yeah, maybe you say we're going to go for an hour.
Somebody else's kids, maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah. So okay, that was wow. This show's already going all over the place.
Well, I was just thinking too, like even on the choosing a season, to be aware of maybe when that season's ending, because we did that when Ruth was born. We had been serving and check-in guest services at Fredo's campus actually, and then we took some time off when she was born, and it's been about a year. I'm realizing now that we haven't been serving, and I feel the lack of connection with the campus. I feel that even though I work here, I'm involved here, but the involvement matters. Yes. And it's easy to let a lot more time than you planned go by. I'm investing in my family, we're doing all those things, but I'm realizing that there's such a lack of connection, because I didn't realize, it's been a year since we've served regularly, and that has affected us. And we're seeing that we're starting to talk about how to get back involved, how to get that back into the rotation of our life, because it's hard once you get out of it to step back in, because you don't realize that all of a sudden you're like, we have this extra time. Isn't this nice? We can fill it with whatever we want, and we do.
And I think relationships develop the most naturally or organically around a common task. Mm-hmm. Like if we just sat in a room and we're like, let's get to know each other. Oh. Tell me your story. Like, what? Like, where do you? Yeah. But when you're working alongside, you're serving on a team with somebody, there's a common task, and it's regular on a weekly sort of rhythm. It just lends itself to these conversations that happen that aren't forced, that aren't awkward. I mean, if it's a problem with our spouses for a day, right? Like imagine strangers. But when you're doing something together and you're focused on a common task, I think it's a natural environment for relationships.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So let's move in. We've got a lot of great questions just about becoming a pastor, the role of a pastor specifically. So we'll start off with Thomas, who says, I've been a Christian for over 2 years now. And after my first year, I seem to be getting confirmation from others that I should be a pastor because they say I have a heart for people. I don't feel yet ready to pursue this yet, as I'm in the stage of healing and self-discovery, and God has been doing some amazing things in my life. However, should I take some realistic steps to know if this is what God is leading me to do and look into possibly seminary or Rogo school? Or should I continue on and accept that this may not be the time for me yet?
Yeah, I would say this: if God's called you, the time is now. So the last thing I would say to do is to push God's call away. I can't tell you how many I'll run into guys 50, 60 years old, and they said, yeah, there was a season where I felt like I was called to ministry, and then these things happened. And I just think about Peter. Jesus is standing on the shore once, and he's saying, come and follow me. And what happens if, Peter, and Jesus actually says this, the guy says, well, let me go bury my father. It's another guy. And Jesus is like, man, let the dead bury the dead. Mm-hmm. There's all these reasons. And so what I would say is quickly start moving towards that and start, meeting with pastors. So I think there's two calls. There's the call of God on your life. Then there's the call of the church to affirm the call of God on your life. Mm-hmm. Those two things work together. And you have to have two calls. You have to have the call of God that you've heard, and you have to have the call of the church that says, yes, we agree that this is what you're called to do. Because otherwise, anybody can just raise their hand and say, yeah, I heard God. Well, crazy people hear God. So we want to make sure that we can validate what God is saying, and that's just so important together. And I would say, get on one of these campuses, get in a ministry, get connected, and start serving today. And then eventually, because if you come into Rogo school and you apply for Rogo school and you say, I'm not serving, I'm not attending, I'm not connecting, I'm guessing we're not picking you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're a part of the I'm not a part of the picking process.
We want to be able to see some tangible expression,
right?
Because I do think that the way in which God calls people is through their ordinary way of living and serving or working, whatever it is. Gideon was called doing what he was doing. Peter was called while he was fishing, right? And so if you're not already in a context where you're able to serve and do something, then I think it would cause us to kind of ask a little bit deeper questions, like, is this something that you actually want to do?
Yeah, we don't want to invest in people who aren't invested. And I think that that's huge, because we want to make sure that, all three of us, we only have so much time. We're just like Spencer, right? We're trying to manage families, trying to have healthy marriages, trying to serve God. It's a waste of our time to invest our time in people that aren't then investing it in people. And so we're just at that level where we have to be investing in leaders. And here's how you know if you're a leader. Are people listening to you and following you? Yeah. And if no one is, I get newsflash, you're not a leader. Like, you're taking a walk. That's what you're doing. And so we want to pour into people that are pouring into people. And so when they come to you, Fredo, and they say, yeah, I've always feel like I'm a leader, I'm called to, to serve God, and they're not leading anybody and they're not serving God, you're going to say what?
Yeah. That actually happened yesterday. I met with a guy, and he was really curious about Rogo and maybe what next steps were for him. And I just told him, is there a burden that you have? Is there a vision that you have that you feel like God is calling you into? And if there is, I think it'll start to haunt you. Like you said to the individual, don't sit on this. Don't wait.
Yeah.
You need to respond, because one of the most painful places to be, I think, is to be in a place of disobedience and not responding to what God's called you to step into.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely the purpose of Rogo School. Like, we created it so that someone who is sorting that out and discerning this call on their own life, but may not be ready to fully step into something formally or vocationally to be paid by a church in a specific role. That's what it's for, and throughout that process, you're gonna, the community, the church will sort of vet out this call and help affirm it or redirect it into a different area. And so that's really the purpose behind it. And so it's not just, I'm called. Yes, we think you're called. Okay, plug you in, because we want our leaders to be equipped and resourced and trained to do the work of God. So.
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah. So this next question comes in from Avery. It says, over the past 2 years, I've felt a clear calling to be a pastor, even though I'm only 17. As I take this long journey of preparing for what God has called and commanded me to do, what advice do you have for me as a young man in our world today?
Yeah, I would just say, and I think I know who this Avery is. I think one of us will be really quiet on the panel. Here's what I would say, Avery, is I think we all affirm already that there's a call on your life, and we happen to know who you are, so let's not pretend that we don't know who this person is. What I would say is just slow your roll a little bit. Give yourself some time to get some experience. Your church loves you. We're willing to wait for you as you develop. We're behind you. I think one of the things, if I could go back and talk to Matt pre-30, a lot of people, like, they feel like turning 30 as you got old. I couldn't wait to get to 30 because I just felt like, as a pastor, the biggest inhibitor to my ministry was my age. I felt like people, just kept invalidating me. Well, because you don't know anything yet, and you're, one day you'll learn and you'll change. And so I was so excited to get to 30, and really, I think looking so forward to being 30, I really missed out on what God was trying to say in my 20s. And that's just the unhealth of the three, right? We're always forward thinking and not present or reflective. And that's what I would say to you, Avery, is I would just say, slow down. Just like you're 17, you're growing, you're going to make some mistakes. You're not who God has called you to be yet. And if you want God to honor where he's called you, you got to let him honor you. You got to honor God with where you are, and just sit in that and say, okay, God, I'm going to slow this down. And Tammy and I were in Boston, and we were walking around together, and I just as an unhealthy three, I'm so busy getting where I'm going that I'm not looking where I'm at. And Tammy and I walked around, and Boston is just one of the most incredible, beautiful cities I've ever seen. I'm almost 50 years old, never been. And so we just went, and we're always so busy getting someplace that we didn't see where we were. And one day we just had nothing to do. And we're walking, and we're just kind of meandering. And I just heard God say, the best way to change your point of view is to change your pace. And just slow down and look around and say, wow. And we just took a walk through, a housing development that's 200 years old, and we just walked on cobblestone streets, and we didn't, and it just was like to slow down. That's what I'd say, Avery, just slow down a little bit. You're not a guy that I would have to say, speed it up. Some people need to hear the other. It's like, hey, right, change your pace goes either way. You can slow it down, or you can pick it up. And so I think a lot of times we're discouraged as leaders because of where God has us, and just say, okay, God, I want to honor you where I'm here. Jesus spent most of his life in Nazareth, and the Bible says, what good comes from Nazareth? Well, the Savior of the world. And I think a lot of us feel like, God can't do anything with where I'm at. And it's so funny, we're at such an odd stage in Sandals Church right now. I get this phone call today, and I'm like, I don't recognize this number. So I do what I do, and I don't recognize the number. I let it go to voicemail. But I was curious because it was a strange area code. And it's this pastor I've been following for 25 years. I have no idea how he got my phone number. Well, then he told me. He said, I talked to so-and-so, and they know you, and they say you're great. I want to meet you. And I've been watching this guy in obscurity for 20 years. I love Riverside. Riverside's not a cool city to live in. It's not New York. It's not LA. It's not even Orange County, but it's where God has me. And I've been sitting here saying, God, I feel like I'm called to have more of a platform than I had. And God said, stay. And now these people, I told him, I said, I've been to your church 10 times. He's like, really? Yeah. My wife and I, we've been to your church 10 times. And he's calling me when God was ready. It's just a bizarre thing. And so, Avery, I would just say, listen to those of us who had to wait a little bit. Fredo's a little young to totally process that. But, just wait. Trust God where you are. I can't tell you, how much obedience and blessing comes from just sitting where you are. And like I recruited you, like you were a teacher, teaching high school Bible, and I said, hey, I want to go to lunch or coffee, and I just said, I want you to think about. You weren't even attending Sandals Church, I don't think.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, you were still in sin. Yeah, just lost. So no, actually, you were attending both of our friends' church, and he's a great guy. You were actually a co-planter of that church, I believe. Yeah, in LA. And so I just said, hey, Fredo, I see this in you, and you weren't looking for that, but the Lord found you. And I think that there's so much. The world says you got to make a name for yourself, and this is one of the things that blows my mind, especially nowadays, where people have these social media platforms that I'm just like, how many followers do you have? And then I look at their church, and it's like, I'm just like. And it's because I'm just doing ministry. I'm just trusting, and these guys, and I just think, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want to have that much social media pressure and that little of ministry. Yeah. It's completely upside down. And, you can get caught up in that I would just say, slow down. You got men and women who love you at this church and affirm you. And I would just say, because he's in a rush, right? Yeah. He's in a rush to grow up. Avery, you've been 18 since you were 4. Right. So slow your roll. It's
true.
It is.
He's Pastor Adam's son, just for those of you who don't know
slow
that.
your roll and just know that you don't just need to trust God. And so, I tell people this when they're called to Sandals Church, and people don't realize this, but there's more than one call to work at Sandals Church. The first is a call to God. The second is a call to Sandals Church, like to the mission and vision of church. And then the third is a call to me. And a lot of people get that confused. Well, I'm just called to serve God. Well, God's called us all to serve alongside or with someone. And so, Avery, that's what I would say is as God's calling you at Sandals, listen to me. Listen to the people that are around you. Listen to the people that God's called you to, because we're going to help you figure this out. And ministry all by yourself is the worst way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wish that Tammy and I, what we love so much about Sandals today is it's becoming what we needed 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And we didn't have that. We didn't have, let's say Tammy and I get in a huge fight and I cuss at her or something, which I've done, So think about it. I'm going to preach on Sunday morning and I just say, we didn't have any, we had to figure that out on our own. Fredo, you can call me like, dude, I just said something to my wife I can't believe. And we can come alongside and help you unpack that. And that is the beauty of Sandals Church. And not just Sandals, but Sandals is invested in Rogo. Like we're going to say no. Think about that. We're saying no to our salaries. Those Rogo dollars, that's our potential bonuses, salaries, right? Benefits. We're saying no to that so we can say yes to the next generation. And I think that's why churches get so dysfunctional, because they're so focused on now, and that's why we don't have anybody coming up next. So Avery, slow your roll. You got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think my role
is Pops, Big Papa.
As Avery's dad, we've recognized he's sort of a unique kid. Even, your wife, Tammy, has been like, yeah, Avery doesn't count. Like, I think you said the other day,
you,
call me when your others come up,
Yeah.
And so, his story is very opposite of mine. I mean, he's recently finally settled into this calling because there was some resistance and some processing. I was running the other direction, like for 15 years of my life, and from a calling that I probably knew deep down. And then I'll never forget the email that I sent to a handful of guys. I'm like, I've been like 93% in for too long. Like I'm all in. Like, but it took a long journey for me to get there. But the one thing, my role as Avery's dad, when Avery gets affirmed all the time, I feel like I'm the needle in the balloon. I need to, and it's not that sounds harsh, but I need to let the air out of, as he's affirmed.
Yeah.
I'm watching out for pride. And so I would say this. I said this to him last night. We had a dinner at our house for the youth Rogo track. So we have with Rogo School, this pipeline for leaders at Sandals Church. We have a youth track that's very robust. It was our first time to really roll this out. So we're celebrating. Our executive pastor, Pastor Dan Zimbardi, was Avery's mentor this year, and he's being affirmed in these ways. And as soon as Avery was done, I was not trying to rain on his parade, but I just said, I'm sitting right behind him. He's in the couch. I'm behind him. He's not even facing me. I said, humility precedes honor.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just remember that. If there was one verse that has been the word of God to me in my role as a pastor at Sandals Church, it's been this: humble yourself. Don't wait on God to humble you. That's a lot more painful.
Oh, geez, amen.
Humble yourself before the Lord, and He will lift you up to a place of honor at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love the slow your roll. 4 going on 18. It's finally kind of getting there. He's an old soul, but so slow your roll and stay humble and do that work on yourself. Humble yourself.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I would just say to guys like Avery, or even guys that are closer to my age range, because I'm kind of in between your son Avery and you guys in age.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of trained in seminary during a time where church platforms really, really got big.
Right.
And I felt like you were getting mixed messages in class, because it's like, we don't want this. Like, you don't want to kind of go down this path, but those are the kinds of people who are coming into chapel and speaking, who had platforms. So it created this kind of what I've heard an author call ecclesiastical porn, right? Or church porn, where you think the Spirit of God is working over there, and you're tempted by that, and all you do is look at what's going on over there at that ministry or that platform, or how big they're getting. And it creates, I think, a lot of unhealthy temptation. And contrary to what you were saying, like, you want to speed up, you want to go faster. And it could be so unhealthy for being content where you're at. One thing I have to tell myself on Sunday mornings at Palm is to pastor the people in front of me and not the people that I want to be there. Obviously as a pastor, you want to see more and more people come to church. but you need to pastor the people who are right in front of you, who walked in, who are in the pew, and deal with them and deal with how God wants to lead you in that way, and not be thinking about all these other exciting things that are happening, because they are, but you're not there,
Right.
and you're not them. Like, you are right here, you know. So, and I've loved your take on really being here in Riverside and calling this like, man, this is our home.
Yeah.
This is the city I'm going to care for and lead. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just so important. And I was convicted of that at an early age, in seminary. You guys have heard me tell that story. I'm sitting in seminary. Church planting is kind of the new thing in the 90s, and everybody's going to all these really cool locations. And then the data shows that all the growth is in the Inland Empire. So some angel in heaven who's doing the calculating is getting it wrong. He's sending, the angel is sending the Holy Spirit. Hey, you got to send all these people to the places where there's no growth. But this, and I'm just like, okay, is the Holy Spirit wrong here, or is it people that care more about where they're serving rather than who they're serving? And Tammy and I got convicted, man, and we left Huntington Beach. I mean, Huntington Beach is one of the coolest cities in the world to live in. But I don't want to live in Huntington Beach forever. I want to live with Jesus forever. And again, you put your yes on the map, and you let God tell you where to go. You don't tell God, I'll go here. That's man. You want to screw up your life? You give God directions, right?
Yeah.
So
just for clarity, you still do have dibs on Sandals Church Maui, because there's been some conversation.
No.
I'm feeling a call.
Yeah, it sounds like it's
I'm
open,
feeling a
guys.
call.
Yeah. Boy, they would think you're Hawaiian quick, doesn't it? I mean, get you a couple of tribal tattoos, bro. Yeah, you
I'm
look
in.
good.
Shocking.
Yeah, dude, you're like he's like a cultural chameleon. You could go like multiple
Greece,
places. Oh yeah,
Italy.
Greece. Yeah,
Yeah.
All right. Notice how he said nice locations. I was going to say Iraq, but
Okay.
Get you a big fat beard.
Yeah.
So on the same topic of parents of children who feel they may be called to be pastors, Danny wrote in and said, after coming home from Sandals Church summer camp, my 11-year-old son said he might be interested in becoming a pastor.
Wow.
He said, or a
Man,
carpenter.
that's cool.
I told him he could be both.
Well, Jesus was both.
That's great.
He said, in addition to prayer, how else can his mom and I support him and help him discover if this is God's call for his life? So even on the earlier end, how can they help him?
Yeah, I would just. Man, do you realize how rare it is for an 11-year-old to come home from camp and say, I think God's call. I would bet your kid heard from God. I got goosebumps right now. I'm betting he heard from God, and I would so flourish that, and I would so nourish. There we go. I would so nourish that, and just so encourage him in any way to start serving, and what that looks like. And here's what I would say to any young person who wants to serve God: if you want to serve God, the first thing that goes on the altar is your weekends. I think that's the idol that you have to kill, because everybody else is running around, going to the movies, going to the mountains, going to Vegas, going to the beach. Everybody else is having fun on the weekends. And not that church isn't fun, but it's the altar. And you cannot serve God if you're going to hold on to your weekends. It does not work. That was conflict for Tammy and I. And again, we didn't have somebody, because like her family planned all the birthdays on Sundays. Sundays at 10 a.m. That's a problem for a pastor. It just, and some of that was wrong on her family's part. It was inconsiderate. And we worked through that, and eventually they changed that. And leading your family to Christ helps them to understand why that doesn't work. But I would just say that's the first thing is, if you're going to steward that, if God has spoken to your kid, I would say as a family, we're going to sacrifice not all of our weekends, but a portion of our weekends so we can steward this person. I mean, you think about Jesus being lost. So a lot of people don't realize that, you haven't lost your kid yet, have you?
No.
Have you guys lost a kid yet?
I have not. No.
Yeah.
Avery will not let me ever forget it.
Yeah, no, it happens. Dude, I've driven home from church.
He was not at the temple.
I heard that story from
And
Madison.
Janie called me. We have a brown child, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to turn all the way around and go back and get my kid and just be humiliated in front of everybody. But Mary and Joseph lost Jesus. I mean, if you're gonna not lose somebody, you don't want to lose God's one and only son. But they lost him, and Jesus just said, "Didn't you know, Mom, I would be about my Father's business?" And so this guy's 11. Jesus would have been right about that age. About 12 is what the text says. So at 12 years old, this young man is already being called. You think about, Hannah, you think about those individuals, bring forth a child and say, God, this is yours. And just know when a kid's called, think about Samson, right? That's the negative example. Samson's called, but mom and dad are a little tentative in leading that strong spirit. And you want to make sure that they're just kids that are going to do great things for God, or they're going to do great things for evil. And so and I'm not saying that about their kid, but they're just some kids. They're going one way or the other.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think I love even just kind of I had goosebumps too a little bit, and it wasn't this last summer camp, but the summer camp before. We had a movement of God on the last night where there were 25 teenagers who raised their hand and said, "Yeah, I'm feeling a pull from God into full-time ministry," and that's so countercultural that I think just by default we'd probably be like, "Yeah, there's something there," And so at Sandals Church, it's Pastor Matt's desire that this isn't a one. Just a one generation kind of deal.
Yeah.
Like we would love, eventually we're growing old and we'd love to see this passed on to the next generation. And so it's really exciting. I'm not sure of too many other places where this kind of thing is still happening, where youth are seen and developed and believed in and nurtured, to grow into leaders in the church. The classic youth sort of verse in Scripture is 1 Timothy 4:12, and it says, "Don't let anyone despise you because of your youth, but be an example to all the believers in a number of areas," one of which is actually purity.
Yeah.
Like, would the youth be the leaders, the examples in purity and in love and in these different ways? And so, I think that as Paul's writing that to his mentee, he's saying, "Hey, look, on the one hand, you gotta wait for the right time. God's going to provide that, and He's going to open up doors. But don't think that it's too soon to begin stepping into leadership." And I love the idea of looking to our young people.
Even in the text too, right after he talks about his youthfulness, he mentions this is how you talk to widows. This is how you talk to elderly people, right? This is how you handle the married. This is how you handle the rich. So he's trying to empower him. Even though you're at this stage of life, you still have a voice to these different kinds of people in their age range, and so such a powerful moment in the text.
That's great. So Jennifer wrote in and said, "You talked about a pastor being able to manage his household, and my son brought up a question. What happens when your child becomes old enough to have free will and do what they want? For example, you've taught them not to drink or do drugs, smoke, or have sex, but they go away to college and do it all, ignoring what you've taught them. How can you be held accountable for their free will?"
Yeah, so I differentiate between adult children and children in the home. So, all of my kids are still under my care, even though my oldest is almost 23. She still lives in my house. She can't operate independently yet from me financially. And so I still have a lot of say in an adult's life. And that's just the reality. And I'm just not one of those parents that's intimidated. We had my niece that used to live with us, and she would say, "When I'm 18, I'm gonna," and I'm like, "You can do that now. Be free, and so the kid's like, "What? What do I do with that?" So I'm not intimidated by, I'm going to do whatever I want, because none of us in this room can do whatever we want.
Not without consequences.
Yeah, not without consequences or robbing somebody. And so what I would just say is I think, pastors, you have to give them grace, especially in situations where there's multiple children involved. The more kids you have, the higher the chance that one's going to, because your attention is divided, and that's just the case. And so I would just say you have to give pastors grace too. What he really is getting at is a pastor who can't control his family. Is he not managing his family well, right? So you can't hold a pastor accountable if he has a kid who has mental illness, right? That's nobody can deal with that. You can't hold. I wouldn't hold a pastor accountable. Let's say Avery, your son, plays football, gets concussion, is given painkillers by a doctor, a well-meaning doctor, and he gets hooked, right? You see what I'm saying? Those things are very, very different. And so we have to look at every situation individually, and you have to evaluate the entire situation. Let's just say my wife goes nuts. She's like, "I'm done. I'm out of here," and we all agree. Like, so am I now disqualified because my wife has gone off the deep end midlife? That happens. You have to look at every situation. What he's saying there is we should all be able to look at it and say, yes, this guy's done his part.
Yeah.
That's what he's done his part. He has not sinned. He has not been in error. He has not been a poor leader of his family, because things happen. Life happens. And, I wouldn't want one of you guys, if, your wife just said, I'm done, to be like, "So you're done?" That's ridiculous. That's giving Satan 2 victories. First your marriage and then your ministry. I mean, it's just like, but a guy who's like, is not listening to his wife, not caring for her, not ministering, and because some guys love their ministry more than their wife, that's a problem too. Yeah. So I would just say, and I don't think if parents have unruly children, I mean, that is for those of you who are single and you don't have kids, you just can't imagine the torment of having a kid that's, struggling in that way. The person just doesn't have the capacity to lead the church. Because let me tell you, we got a church of what? We had 73,000 people check in during this series. We got a lot of people on the edge.
Right.
You don't have mental capacity for those people on the edge if you're on the edge. And that's what he's saying. Yeah. So
I think too, the qualification Paul lays out implies that someone can look into your family situation, right? Mm-hmm. So if he's saying you need to be able to manage your household well, that's implying that you are authentic, real, right? Opening up your life so that someone can examine to see that you're well,
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of important to mention. In addition to, like, this is not for every single situation of someone,
right.
Who's got an unruly child or something like that. So
yeah, and having said that, just even as we've invited our church into honoring the position of the pastorate, and as even you're asking for grace, I would want to speak to how challenging it is to be a pastor's kid.
Yeah, I agree.
My mom was a pastor's kid, the oldest of 4 daughters, and it wasn't a great experience for her. You're visible. It's the fishbowl kind of life, and one of the things that's sort of even a little bit surprising with Avery is I didn't want any of them to have any pressure. You've said this before too, right? To be in my shadow, or man, Avery may be called to ministry, but the other 3, man, give your life's best to God. If it's in the marketplace,
yeah, sure,
if it's wherever. But there are moments, not all the time, but where ministry calls us beyond our normal working hours, and where we're pulled. I mean, my 3rd son, who's 11, he will literally sometimes drag me away out if I'm at a campus, and I'm a talker and I love people. So, and he's hungry for lunch. And I'm doing my job. This is I'm a pastor. I gotta. And he's like, yeah, but it's 1:30 and I haven't eaten lunch yet. And so that's a silly example, but there's my heart goes out to pastors' kids, knowing that there are challenges. Now, at the end of the day, that pressure they need to handle and be responsible for themselves, and not let that crack. And hopefully we can protect them from some of that. But yeah, just the grace of knowing that, it's enough to be enough of a challenge to lead the family of God and your place at home. So
yeah, I would say that, fame, undue attention is not good for anyone. And children of pastors, and you wouldn't call them famous, but they're known in ways that they wouldn't normally be known, and so they face pressures that they wouldn't normally have. And so we all have to have grace for them. And I think Sandals is a healthy church now. We've not always been a healthy church, and my kids have been, unfortunately, the recipients of undue criticism and pain and suffering because of decisions I've had to make. And so that part breaks my heart, is that my kids have been hurt and wounded by dysfunctional people, staff I've had to let go. You think about that. Church is the one business where you're not just employer-employee, but your family. And so, I mean, it's like when you terminate an employee or an employee quits because they don't like. I mean, it's like many divorces, and I think that's been the thing that has grieved me so bad for my kids. And this is the number one reason I think a lot of churches don't grow, is because people don't deal with that. And at Sandals, we deal with it head on, and we challenge staff, and some staff handle it, and some staff don't. And unfortunately, my kids have been wounded by that, and that's been. I mean, I remember one night, my daughter was in tears. Because of an issue we were having with a youth pastor, just in tears, and it just broke my heart. Because, they in their sin, right, we're in sinners, did something that hurt my child, which they were not responsible for in any way. And that broke my heart. So I think we all need to have a special love for our pastors and for their kids. And a lot of kids, I know I felt this as a pastor's kid. I feel like I got to prove I'm not holier than thou. And so I went the other way. And I did a lot of things that I don't think I would have ever done, but I felt like I had to prove that I was cool. Like I had street cred. You know, I'm like Kanye West. I got to prove I'm hardcore when everybody's like, dude, you got a mom and a dad who went to Christian school. You know, right? Did Kanye go to Christian school? I don't know why I'm looking at you.
I'm not sure.
I think he was raised like upper middle class. So he's not like Jay-Z.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You're not from the streets, but you try to act like you are. And so I think a lot of pastors' kids feel that way. It's like, well, I'm going to act like I'm hardcore. You know, they're almost ashamed for being blessed. It's like, hey.
Yeah.
So, but we got to give them grace. Great questions.
Yeah. Okay, so Michael wrote in and said, from the list of things that make a good pastor, I'm assuming he's referring to the verse from 1 Timothy 3 that you went over this weekend, which one, and I would love for each of you to answer this, which one would you say you are best at and why? And what one is your weakest? And how do you think you can become stronger in it?
Yeah, you want to start with you?
Yeah, so we actually had an opportunity. It was really interesting. Our executive pastor had led us. We had a meeting of pastors, and independently of knowing that Pastor Matt was going to preach on 1 Timothy 3, he led us through the passage the Thursday.
Yeah, describe what
I
happened.
thought you guys had talked.
No.
Yeah.
When I heard that he was going to do that, it's like, oh, wow.
So describe what happened, though.
Yeah, so he walked us through this passage, which he himself, Dan Zimbardi, had studied a bunch as he was discerning his own call years ago, coming out of the marketplace and to lead our church organizationally alongside Pastor Matt. And he said he wanted to know, like for himself, like am I qualified, and really self-examine and reflect on that. And so he led us through the list and gave us some time together, alone, to really look through it and almost self-evaluate. Hey, you know, hopefully we can check all the boxes, but some we're not as great at in the other as another. So we had this time of reflection, and then we actually paired off with another pastor and just shared, man, here's the one that kind of stings me a little bit, man, like I could grow in this area. And so we didn't look as much as, well, or like where we feel strong in. So I'd have to kind of refresh my memory on that. But for me, I have an addiction past, and some of you know about that. But the one that struck me first was actually self-control, because since we ran our Ironman, like I've checked out of like staying in shape. I've gained about 20 pounds, and I'm just out of rhythm, like just with physical disciplines. I don't eat like horribly or a lot in that way, but I'm not good with like yesterday I got to dinner, I was like, I didn't eat lunch. You know, just making sure that I'm self-controlled and that I'm not overindulging and things like that. So for me, at this juncture in my life, I mean, there's been seasons where I've felt really disciplined, really in control of myself. But that was the one that struck, and just knowing that I need to get back into an exercise routine and, you know, that kind of deal. That was the one for me.
How about you?
I think for me, a big area where I would love to see more growth would be hospitality. I'm just generally a more private person, got a close circle of friends. You know, I don't need a lot of people in my life. And so the call to love strangers, the call to kind of see my yard and my space or wherever I'm at as an opportunity for others to step into is very much a challenge, especially when I'm at home. I love when people are at church. I love being around them and stuff. And so that's certainly an area for me where I'd love to continue to see more and more growth. So, and we are pretty hospitable generally, but there are more areas where I know in my own heart that I'm wanting to see more come out of that, because it's way easier for me to just kind of be greedy with my time and space. So,
what's your 5 score?
Pretty high.
Yeah, very high. Okay. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know the Enneagram, that's the core sin of the 5 is just greedy, just with withholding. I think you're blessed, Fredo. Just people just like you, so they give you grace. They just like you. Usually, you have a personality. Like people are like, yeah, I like Fredo. Like I've never met somebody who's like, you know who I can't stand? Fredo. Like nobody's ever said that. So the Lord's given you an anointing, and I think it's the eye test I talked about. Yeah. People look at you and they go, yeah, okay, I can see that, and they just like you and follow you, and that's just God-given, gift. And that's just some of the things for those of you who are thinking, some of these things you just can't work at. The Lord gives. Like you can steward the gift, but you can't create the gift. You can't manufacture the gift. And, and that's just the reality. Like, so when I was in seminary, the big thing with my seminary was we're going to build leaders. It's like, well, well, good luck with that, because people are like, yep or no. People decide, and you can work on leadership principles, and you can lead the people who have to go to work and look at you every day. You can become better at that. But a leader doesn't need to write a paycheck to get people to follow him. They just follow him. And so that's what I'd say. And I think your gift is you are hospitable. I mean, that's what I see. Like, you love people, and like, you never met a stranger you didn't like. Like, I mean, he tells stories about some homeless drug addict at 2 a.m. is knocking on his door. And like, you and I, we're not answering the door. Yeah. Adam's like bringing him in, leading him to Jesus, taking him to the jail or whatever you did. I'm just like,
turning him in.
I ordered an Uber for her to go home, but I followed up with her the next day. I went into the ghetto of San Bernardino.
So if there's ever a story about some pastor being stabbed in the middle of the night, it's not going to be us. It's going to be Adam. I think my gift is God has given me a communication gift, and I've had that since I was little. The ability to relate topics to people and to connect with various groups of people. There have been very, very few situations where I feel like I just can't connect or relate. Right. And so God gives me an ability to connect and then to relate and to communicate. And it's why we have Claude teach our preaching, because he's really worked at it. I really didn't. God just, you know what I'm saying? God just gave it to me. And so I'm not really good at helping people figure out how to do it for themselves. That's not my gift. I don't really think about it a lot. I just do what God's kind of given me. And so, was the next question what we have to work on?
Yes.
Or where you feel you're weakest. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have an unhealthy relationship to loving strangers. I get myself in situations where I feel like I should. So like I must have more one than I think. So I should do this. And so then what happens is I'm neglectful to my wife and my kids. So I'm a talker too. And I can get wrapped up in that and not leave time. I've my lowest score is 5. Like, I have on the test that we took with the counselor guys from Louisville, I was 0.4% 5.
Wow.
I had 2. Yeah. It was terrible. My wife's like, "You have no wisdom." I was like, "I've been telling you that for years." So
that's good.
Great question. Whoever that was. Who was that?
That was
really
Michael.
Good.
Well, and
Michael.
I think what it indicates for pastors who may be listening is the importance of like the qualifications listed here at your ordination ceremony, fancy word for what the church does when they affirm that call. Yeah. That's a one-time sort of event that's special and ceremonial or whatever, but you can disqualify yourself.
Yeah.
So regular sort of check-ins with this passage, and even by extension, not just pastors, but leaders in the church, volunteer or otherwise. This is a great list. I loved how you were able to take a list of qualifications for pastors and really even extend that to the church this past weekend.
So good.
So any one of us could go through here and be like, yeah, this is also sort of what it's like to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. I want to be above reproach. I want to have a good reputation with outsiders. I mean, and so just to encourage fairly regular self-examination, like that question of, like this is an area I need to up my game in.
Yeah.
And that we should look at, I think we should look at leaders, not with a critical eye, but we should have expectations. And, I was talking with a pastor last night, you know who we're talking about, and he said this out loud. I feel like I'm in a fishbowl. To be a pastor is to live in a fishbowl. And that's sucky, but it's also the calling. And, we have, 13,000 people in a weekend that come to Sandals Church. You get to go to your own home and you disappear, and God knows what you do. When you're a pastor, people are watching and people have a say into that. And I think that we need to recognize that the body of Christ needs a leader, and the leader needs the body of Christ. And so we have to speak to their life, and we need to allow ourselves to be spoken to. And I think this person in particular that we're talking about has lived a fairly good Christian life, but is now in a position of pastor where there's a fresh look. Yeah. And it's saying, okay, now there's some things that we need to work on that, you're sitting in the congregation, everybody's like, yeah, Fredo's a great guy. And we're not talking about Fredo. Yeah. But now Fredo's a pastor, and we're saying, okay, Fredo, you've been sitting in the pews and those things are fine. I need you to work on these issues. And these are musts. Yeah. You have to love strangers. And I can tell you this, a lot of pastors in churches, the primary reason they don't grow is they don't have a love. They don't have a love for the lost people of their community. And a lot of pastors are professors, and it's interesting, intelligence, study habits, and wisdom are not mentioned.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
and I would say one of the greatest inhibitors to a lot of guys' sermons, I don't feel like I'm smart enough. I want you to, now you can't be an idiot, but it's not on that list. And James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God for it, and God will give it to you. Yeah. So it's just really, really interesting. And so we talked in small group, what were you shocked that's not on that list? And wisdom and intelligence was the two things that but there are intelligences there. They're not just book smart intelligences. Yeah. How you work with people, how do you lead your family? Like what he's saying is look at somebody's life. The degree doesn't matter. Yeah. Just because you have a PhD, what if you suck with people? Yeah. Like you can't.
Yeah.
Which is a thing for sure.
Yeah. Oh, dude.
One of the things we discussed in our pastors meeting with this list is really all but one are not skill-based.
Right. Yeah.
It's character.
Yeah.
And so the one skill being able to teach, sure, there's we could label it a skill or an intelligence to be able to relate well or whatever, but yeah, I mean, it's another level. I mean, normal people, meaning not that pastors are abnormal, but if you're not a pastor, you're not thinking twice about I'm buying a bottle of wine at Bevmo. Right. Yeah. Like I need to be aware of those things. Right. Not that it's wrong for me to buy a bottle of wine to have with dinner or whatever. But if I'm in church after Sunday and we just went through a list of qualifications about not being a heavy drinker, and a member sees me buying a bottle of wine, like I just need, not that I'm not going to buy the bottle of wine, but I'm thinking like there's a filter in place for me of like, man, as if I'm a leader, there's some liberties that I'm going to have to give up at times. Yeah. And even if it's to avoid a perception, like, am I willing to give up something to avoid a perception, that might lead someone that's following me astray. Yeah. Right. And so it's another level for sure. Yeah.
All right. So as we wrap up today's episode, I just want to ask one final question. Just how can our Debrief listeners be praying for each of you guys and just the pastors that lead Sandals Church? So as we're wrapping up, what can folks be praying for you guys for?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and Paul talks about it, he runs through this list of all the things that he's got going on in his life. And then he ends with, and on top of all of that, he talks about all the stresses, all the trials, all the worries. And then he ends with, and on top of that, I have the burden of the churches. And so, we run into people's lives when they're falling apart. And that's a lot of work, so firemen can relate, police officers can relate. It's why I'm so hesitant to criticize police officers, because we need them to do their job 100% perfect every time. And it's, you guys know, I mean, you've been in situations with a pastor where you're like, I was not, okay, this is crazy. And some situations are crazy. And police officers in particular, you and I went through that training together where Adam and I walk in this room and this guy's just dropping F-bombs, screaming at us. It's just like, whoa.
It was a simulator.
It's a simulator, yeah. Yeah.
So you're supposed to respond.
Good qualification.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's jarring, right? And there are situations in ministry where it's jarring. And not that police officers don't make mistakes, and not that there aren't bad cops, absolutely. But it's firemen, police officers, what would be another job? Counselors,
like medical professionals.
When you're seeing trauma, when you swim in the ocean of trauma, you just have to have a special appreciation for people who have to do that. And unfortunately, pastors, right? We swim in the sea of trauma. Yeah. People don't say, "Hey, let's call Fredo tonight because everything is fine."
Right. No news is good news.
Yeah. Right. So they're calling.
I'm learning that.
Yeah, they're calling Fredo when
no one's emailing me. We're okay.
Yeah. No. So our interactions with people, and that's why, I have a heart for for police, because they're interacting with us at our worst, and we want them to be at their best every time. Now they should be trained or whatever, but we know we had a situation this weekend at Hunter Park where one of our pastors went up to somebody, and this person went to, 11 on the Richter scale. And I'm like, okay, here's how we have to respond as pastors. And it's a thing when somebody is hostile towards you and violent and angry. And we just read, you can't strike back. So how do we pray for our pastors that they deal with that? Because what a lot of guys do is they don't deal with it, aggressively, but they are passive aggressive. They start drinking, they get an addiction to porn. We all manage stress in some weird way. And so I would just say, pray that we deal with our stress in a healthy way, and that we don't take it out on our spouses. And I can just tell you early on, Tammy and I would get in these fights, and this is real, but that's, I'm going to share it. She's not here. So, but I got to go do counseling with, and I remember this one night, and this guy's having 4 affairs. He's sleeping with 4 women. And his wife's crying, why won't you just have sex with me? And then I go home to my wife, whom I'm only having sex with, and she's mad at me because of where my underwear is. And I'm like, what? And so I had a hard time relating. And what happens is, and I think this is what happens with cops, they deal with crazy people all the time. They have a hard time dealing in reality.
Sure.
The same thing happens to pastors. We're dealing with nutty, crazy situations, and you come home and you have to, well, my underwear still needs to not be on the floor because it matters to her and it's gross,
Yeah.
So I need to pick that up. And I had a hard time transitioning from trauma to my reality. And because, my wife wasn't doing those things and she wasn't in those meetings and she doesn't know what that's like. And so I got to make sure that I'm, operating with her where she is. And I think that was really, really hard for me. And so I started, on the way home, I'm praying, okay, Lord, help me to be attentive dad, connected to my wife, help me to do those things. And like last night was Ethan's first basketball game. It was great.
He scored 10.
He scored 10. He did really well, hit some shots. They were playing, my son's a little white kid, goes to a little tiny school. They were playing La Sierra public school. So it's like a legit school. And, they were nervous, but he did great. And I was so proud of him. And I was proud of the coach. And, but that was, those are the joys I think some pastors miss out on. They're so wrapped up in their work. I never looked at my phone. I was there the whole night, just watching. And I just thought, this is one of the greatest moments of my life. Just watching my son play basketball.
That's cool.
And it was great. Our small group went with us. So, our community group was great. And then we went out to dinner afterwards. And then I had to go, do an hour and a half ministry call, which, you were aware of. So, I mean, literally, we finished dinner at 9 o'clock and I text you, I think 9:30 to 11. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I got to go have a crap conversation, but it worked out okay. God was gracious and God was good. And that's the bizarre thing. And you got to learn to do that, right? So I got to be attentive to my family and present, knowing that I have a very difficult conversation afterwards. And my wife, right? So she's going to go to sleep without me because she knows I got to go have this difficult meeting.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Don't you think that's the thing that's weird is ministry's ongoing, never ending.
Yeah.
Like so many people get to clock out.
Yeah.
And
you get texts randomly.
oh, dude, it's just weird.
Yeah, and even if you're not clocked in, right?
Yeah,
you're still carrying. There's a subtle emotional and spiritual weight or burden that sure we can bear too much of and get unhealthy. Like that's for the Lord to his burden's light. Get that, but there is a reality to the role that I didn't understand until I experienced it. It's like it's just sort of hanging, like it's there in the background at any given time. And so I would answer that question. And this is a way you could pray for any Christian, but in particular for pastors. It's going to sound preachy, but that we would be grounded in who we are in Christ.
Yeah.
Like that our identity would be centered and grounded and unshakable, because if we're looking for affirmation somewhere else, we're going to get into some trouble, right? I mean, we're going to start wandering. Our thoughts aren't going to be in the right place. Just those truths of Scripture that we talk about, that apart from Him, we can do nothing. And so are we personally walking with Jesus? Are we grounded in our own relationship with Him? Are we practicing prayer and being in the Word and all of those things? And so, because that's it's not like we're like awesome at that either. Like that's a challenge for pastors too.
Training.
Yeah, what's
We're
that?
still training.
Yeah.
So. My two things would be the presence. You can pray that we would experience God's presence. Along the lines of what you were saying. Ironically, we work hard on a Sunday to help other people experience God's presence. And often at the times where we may not experience that ourselves,
right.
So I kind of find this irony on the weekend where we're trying to help usher people in to be awake and aware of what He's doing in their life. And oftentimes like it could be lost on us, And then the second thing would just be integrity. I mean, it's 2019, and it's crazy to think that I've read books from pastors who are no longer pastors because of a lack of integrity. Their families have fallen apart. They're in affairs. They no longer believe certain things. And so we're just starting to see, I think, the negative ramifications of trying to, create these platforms that are just not sustainable.
Right.
Where we were never, I don't think God ever intended to brand pastors. and it's become a brand for a lot of people, and it's just a scary place to be, So yeah,
I appreciated. So we had staff meeting today, and Adam actually preached at it, and I appreciate more now being able to hear messages, and I got to get in the back, and I was all by myself, and be able to worship and not feel like somebody was watching me, but be able to get on my knees and because I'm not up next, and so sitting there and then taking the Lord's Supper, and that was really, really good for me. And we all need the Lord. My we're going through it right now, and we're waiting for a liver transplant for my mother-in-law, and we're at the hospital every day, and that's wearing. It's wearing, and so that was good today. And that's the thing is, again, like Spencer, going all the way back. The busier you are, the more you need God, because God is the setter of rhythms. And I think of like, like when you hear a new song, it's just got a rhythm it's just captivating. I think that's what the Holy Spirit is, right? When you're just with Him, it's just like everything is better. Yeah. When you're moving at the pace of God, you get ahead, you're in trouble. You get behind, you're in trouble. And so I just think for me, it was so helpful today to just sit in worship and just connect and to listen. I thought your message was great and appropriate, because Adam preached on what are you worried about, what are you whining about, what was the other W,
what do you want,
what are you wanting, and it was all about just your job. So like you preached just to staff today, and that was good. That was really, really good, and I appreciated that. So
I would say one last thing: prayer that we get opportunities to rest. That we're and our people have been great. Like I know we're a lot more mature as a church now. I think you've probably experienced a lot more of this in the past, but just people, most of our people are pretty reasonable and get that. Like, man, like God bless you on that weekend off. Like, sometimes even be asked. Hey, are you, have you had some time with the family or whatever?
Yeah.
Just we need the rest too. We're working hard. And the rhythm is six on, one day off. But sometimes there's those moments. I went. My dad's getting a little bit older, or a lot. He's 73. He's experiencing some heart things, and so about a month ago, we went up to a cabin in the mountains, and it's off the grid. No cell reception, no Wi-Fi. The thing doesn't even have electricity. It runs on propane. Pastor Andrew's family has it, and they let us stay there. Just my dad and my 4 boys, because I don't know how much longer we'll have with him. He could give us another year. He could give us 5, but it was just so refreshing.
Right.
And it was so like you come back refueled and ready to go at it again. And those moments they go a long way. And so just rest I think is another good one. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for how you serve Sandals Church and God here. So, and thank you guys so much for all the great questions you sent in. We're going to keep going a few times more. Got a couple more episodes left this year as we walk through the series. So if you have questions, please send those in at debrief.show, and we would love to get them on the show. Thanks, guys.
Thanks guys. Bless you.